All right, and we're live. So, welcome back, everybody. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans! It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. The podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. Without further ado, we are going to let our guest, Mr. Todd Fahnestock, introduce himself to our listeners and viewers. I sounded it out, so I got it
You
right.
read dogmatically.
All right, Todd, can you introduce yourself? And then we're going to go with Todd from here on out, so I don't have to try again.
Absolutely.
It's
I'm Todd
Fahnestock.
Fahnestock. Actually, if you say it faster, it's Fahnestock. But I'm an epic fantasy writer, and I'm very excited to be a part of the this podcast. Blasters and help me out with that. Blasters and blades. God, we went right out of my head. I was saying it 15 times before I got on the podcast, and then of course I couldn't remember the name. That's typical for me.
That's all right. JR practiced your name beforehand, and it doesn't show at all either.
Nope.
Maybe if I'd gone Blasters and Blades, it would have worked out for me.
Yeah. So we actually had a fun time coming up with names because when we were rebranded from the Sci-Fi Shenanigans, when we started doing more than just sci-fi, we were looking at names, and we went through a couple, and we got a few cease and desist letters from lawyers. Apparently we accidentally hit on a booze company that didn't want us to have a podcast that wasn't about booze with their name. We got the a Hasbro Games mech game from like the 80s that it was so old I'd never heard of it, but they were trying to bring it back, so of course we got the cease and desist letter.
You've never heard of Robotech either.
I'd heard of it, I just never watched it.
There is something seriously wrong with you, child.
You think Pern is like a fantasy sci-fi story when it's fantasy because it's got dragons.
You're agreeing with me.
A Freudian slip there, JR.
Now, we've had this argument so many times that I know her position too. Mine is dragons equal fantasy.
My position is right and yours position is wrong.
Just because that's what the creator of the universe said doesn't mean she's right. I learned this in English Lit. Hey, what do they know? Anyway, we'll move right along. So the next part of the introduction, dear listener, is how we first found them. So this was one of the ones where Todd reached out to us. So Todd, how did you find us?
I would have to blame Mark Stallings for that. So I'm part of this group of writers that founded a shared fantasy world called Eldros Legacy. And Mark Stallings is one of the five of us. We'll talk more about Eldros Legacy later, but Mark Stallings is one of the five of us that is a founder of that, and he's a networker extraordinaire. He knows everybody, and he mentioned this podcast, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll give it a shot. So
yes, I know Mark very well. He does come with good bourbon. That does help.
He does, yeah. He's good at the networking thing for sure.
Bourbon, beer,
whatever is needed with that particular social group.
Most definitely. I just had this image of Mark holding out a trench coat going, what do you need?
What is it that you want?
No. He needs that trench coat now.
So this is the one Rob Howell does too, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
It's Rob Howell, Mark Stallings, Marie Whitaker, and Quincy J. Allen, and me.
Yep.
Okay.
You're like the only one I didn't know out of the list before today.
Well, now you do. You know how to pronounce my last name correctly.
I can say Fahnestock. Can you, JR?
How about those Cowboys? All right, now we got to do the religion question because we can't dive into this interview unless we know if you're going to stay.
Outstanding. Let's go right into religion. That's always the way to start a conversation.
You know what? We love to flirt with destiny or explosives. Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly.
Oh, okay. Can I say that I love them all three and then pick one? Can I do that? Because I do. So I my young self was far more influenced by Star Wars. I was in the theater the first time that Star Destroyer came overhead, right? And it just completely blew my mind. However, in my latter years, I watched Firefly over and over. I've probably watched that 25 times, the whole series. And every now and then when I'm feeling blue, I go and watch it again. So I'm going to have to go with Firefly.
That is a very legit answer. I hope your depression episodes are much shorter than mine because there's only like 13 hours. 15, I guess, if you count like that's the movie.
I know, but I mean, there's like every time I'm feeling like I'm in hell, I just go and I listen to this episode about the special hell, and I feel much better about myself.
I can understand that.
You go to the DMV, you sit and you watch people around you, and you realize, oh, my life's not really that messed up after all.
That's another way to do it. I would rather watch Firefly, given the choice between those two. But
yeah,
I mean, Firefly does win, but I mean, I'm throwing out options here because I'm an answer man. I'm a solution guy.
And yet you're still so messed up.
I didn't say I use my own dang solutions. That's a separate issue. All right, move along.
Moving on to our next category of religion. So this is Blasters and Blades. We got to be a little polytheistic.
I'm liking the religion. I thought you were gonna like go down a list of organized religions, but you're jumping right into the geek religion. So
don't tell the Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly fans that they're not an organized religion.
My apologies. I'm gonna back away from that. Really
they are disturbingly organized.
Wait. In all fairness, though, the Jedis did try to start themselves as an official religion that was recognized by the state in the United Kingdom. Ooh. It was not recognized yet, but that could still happen.
It should happen.
I'm sure it's just a matter of time.
Just a matter of time.
Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, or The Wheel of Time?
Oh, geez. Are we talking books or are we talking like the movies?
I'll let you pick the wheel.
Oh, that's hard. I mean, like the Lord of the Rings movies it was one of the best adaptations I've ever seen in my life. We won't talk about The Hobbit, but the Lord of the Rings movies, oh gosh. But Game of Thrones was really, I mean, like they just went right to the edge. And I appreciate people that are willing to like push the boundaries. And now I got to give the nod to Lord of the Rings because the end of Game of Thrones just really went sideways. So it was so good. And then it kind of went sideways at the end. So I got to give the nod to Lord of the Rings. I'm just thinking about the movies.
It's brilliant marketing. He let HBO beta test his ending. It's brilliant.
And that's what you get.
No, I think honestly, after how they responded, I think he has just decided. I think he's really written the book, and he's just going to publish it posthumously because he doesn't want to hear anybody else's feedback on it.
Well, he certainly doesn't need the money at this point. So if I was in his place, I might do the same. It's like, I don't want anybody telling me what I should have fixed about the ending. So I'll just wait until they can't.
Hell, he doesn't even, he's like, I've written it. I don't even have to edit it. They can take care of that after I'm gone. That's the part I don't want to do anyways. I would totally be kicking back doing it.
I think that's a good theory. I think you probably got something there.
See? Seriously. Jared thinks I'm mean every time I say it. So
he did go extremely silent.
Yes, he does. He does that, particularly when Elvis is trying to talk to him.
Yeah, when Elvis is barking so the audience doesn't have to listen.
But we love your dog. He's a drinking game. So
if they drank every time he barked, their livers would be like in a lot of trouble.
Well, somebody has to have a stunt liver. So,
I want that. Can I have a stunt liver? I want a stunt liver.
I knew somebody who had one in the SCA. It was pretty funny, but it was like a one-time weekend thing, and he got to go up to anybody and say, you get to drink my shot.
Okay, I see.
His knighthood turned 21. His wife provided them as sight tokens. We got pictures of him as when he was 21. It was very embarrassing for him. It was funny. But back to sci-fi and fantasy. Which one's your first love?
Oh, fantasy for sure. So essentially, when I was in junior high, that's what they called middle school back in the Stone Age when I went to middle school. There was the library was right next door, right across the street. And one day I was waiting for my mom to pick me up. We lived like 13 miles out of town. I grew up in Durango, Colorado, and we lived out on the Mesa, Florida Mesa. And so I would wait for her to pick me up. And I walked over to the library. And, at that point, my favorite books were like the Mother West Wind stories and, Rudyard Kipling stories and things like that. And I was wandering through the stacks and I came across this book by Lloyd Alexander called The Book of Three. And I did not understand the title. How is it The Book of Three? It's only one book. Like, I mean, that was my very literal mindset. And I pulled it out, and it had this like kid with a sword and this guy sitting on this big horse, and he had a skull around his head with antlers coming up around it. And I'm like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. And I started reading it, and that was the end. I mean, like, I would not read anything but fantasy from that point. I moved from that to the Sword of Shannara, to the Dragonlance Chronicles by Weiss and Hickman, to Piers Anthony and his Xanth trilogy, as well as the Blue Adept series. No, it's not the Blue Adept. It's the Apprentice Adept series. And I was just lost in fantasy from that point for the next 10, 20 years. So I guess my whole life, really, because I don't read a whole lot of fantasy now because I write a lot of fantasy. And frankly, the fantasy book has got to be amazing for me to not be picking it apart, because this is what I do, right? I mean, I do this with my own books. So it's funny how little fantasy I read these days. I still do. I'm currently in the middle of Kagan the Cursed by Jonathan Mayberry. And that's fun so far. It's very much Conan the Barbarian kind of story so far. But yeah, that's fantasy was my first love. Although probably one of my favorite books of all time is a science fiction book. So
which book?
Ender's Game. I almost wore my shirt that says "The Enemy's Gate is Down," but I wore this one instead.
Nice. Yes, Ender's Game is a very awesome.
It holds up. I read that thing every couple of years, and it holds up every time.
Have you read the expanded books, the other books?
A lot of them. I read, of course, Speaker for the Dead and Xenocide, and I think there was another one, but I can't remember the name of it. That storyline got a little stale for me towards the end, but then of course he picked it up with the Bean Chronicles, where they kind of follow Bean from the moment that he and Ender are together. So the Shadow of the Giant and Ender's Shadow, and anyways, there's a bunch of them. And those were really good too. It's been a while. I don't read those again over and over every year. So that was probably 10 years ago when I read all of those.
Did you watch the movie? Ender's Game, the movie?
Yes, I did. Yes.
I liked it.
Did you?
I did, but I hadn't read the book first. I mean,
well,
I find that
you're not close enough for me to slap you then. No.
So I can appreciate when I watch a movie adaptation of anything that it is going to be its own entity that just happens to share some character names in a title, and appreciate them for good or for bad.
That's fair. I guess when I'm so emotionally close to something, it's harder for me to do that. I suppose if I went back now and tried to watch it and had my expectations really, really low, I might be able to enjoy it. I mean, it's got Harrison Ford in it, for crying out loud. It's got to be, it's got to be okay, right? But when they didn't, I don't know. I don't want to spoil.
No. I totally understand, because I remember when Warner Brothers brought the rights to the Pern universe. And everybody else is celebrating, and I'm going, please don't do it. Please no. Please no. Do not
violate
this thing that I love. So yeah. I understand.
Yeah, no, I want to go back and it looked really cool. Like the effects were great, but there were elements of the story that they ripped out, or elements of story that they truncated, and the Queen was on the moon or something. Like she was right there all the time. I couldn't deal.
So are there any film adaptations besides Lord of the Rings that you have liked?
Yes. In fact, The Princess Bride might actually have been a better movie than the book. The book was excellent. It was really good. If you've never read the book, The Princess Bride, it is worth the read. But I think the movie's better. So yes, that one for sure. So go ahead.
I was going to say, so for me, I know a lot of purists get really, really upset about that kind of stuff. But for me, sometimes I discover authors in books because the movie came out, right? And I'm like, oh, this was good. And someone will be like, oh, did you read the book? Wait, there's a book? And so from my perspective, I sort of take it as I don't care what gets them in the door as long as they walk into the library.
I love that statement. That could be a bumper sticker, or at least, on my chalkboard wall over here to my right.
So for me, it's but I also like a lot of the cringy B movies that other people are like, how can you watch that? And I'm laughing hysterically the whole time.
Some of them are really good. Some of them they scratch a particular itch. Yeah, no, I like some B movies myself.
I like
Nice
things that don't
comment.
take themselves too seriously, if you haven't noticed.
It's a good way to be. It's a good way to be.
Life's too short. So, all right. So, what is it about speculative fiction, sort of the umbrella genre, that you love so much?
I think at the time, I just felt like I tumbled down a rabbit hole, right? I mean, like, so for me, it's always been epic fantasy. I mean, I definitely have read some of the other fantasy is just, I mean, when I was a kid, it was epic fantasy. That was it. And they just called it fantasy. It was science fiction or fantasy. Now we've got urban fantasy. We've got paranormal fantasy. We've got, epic fantasy. We've got, even within epic fantasy, there's high fantasy, there's dark fantasy. I mean, like, it's just, we got so many different subgenres. But for me, when I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about that high fantasy. Like, it is a different world. You are in some other universe. And for me, that's where I wanted to live. I mean, I do talks a lot with students, elementary school, high school, and oftentimes I'll get asked, why is it that I write? And the reason I write is because when I was 14, my parents got divorced. And I didn't want that to be happening. And that's about the time that I really started reading a lot of fantasy. And at the time, I had no idea what was happening, psychologically speaking. But now I can totally dissect it. I mean, it was escapism in the truest sense. I was in a world I didn't want to be in. And in the worlds that I was reading about, it was all about how somebody who had no control and no power went on a journey, ended up either acquiring power or acquiring friends or whatever, such that they could defeat the thing that was oppressing them at the very beginning. And I wanted that. The divorce was like my big Sauron, right? And I wanted a magic sword that could just make it stop and have my parents get back together. Now, obviously, in real life, that didn't happen. But being able to go away to a place where no matter what the odds were against you, you could rise up and beat whatever it was that was, threatening the lands or threatening the world. Boy, that spoke to I wanted that so badly, and it got me through, I mean, like, it literally, books saved my life. There were a lot of other friends that I had that their parents were getting divorced and they were getting into trouble, and they were like, vandalizing places or stealing things or hurting themselves or getting into drugs or whatever. I didn't. I fell into Piers Anthony, Terry Brooks, Margaret Weiss, Tracy Hickman, Lloyd Alexander. I just fell into those books completely headlong, and raised my head sometime in my 20s and realized I'd escaped, now I understand what was happening. So that's for me, that's why speculative fiction. And when I started writing it, I wanted to give that to somebody who was in need. Like, I wanted to create a world where they could fall into it and, and love it just like I did. So that's why
he has such a wonderful altruistic reason. Whereas JR's like, Cisca, right, you can kill people and you'll feel good.
Well, that's also really awesome. I mean, you get to play God, right?
So I actually start, like,
he's not even playing God. He's like, Cisca, do it. It'll feel good. You'll kill people. You can embarrass them, humiliate them. It'll feel good.
I speak to the audience, and that was my vindictive co-host. So I spoke her love language, murder and mayhem. I actually started as a. You're welcome. I started they actually offered at the time, I don't know if they still do, but the veterans hospitals were doing writing as therapy classes as a way to sort of process trauma. And so by making it sci-fi, speculative fiction, whether it was fantasy or sci-fi, it allowed you to sort of think through some of the stuff that happened without actually having to relive it, which is how I started. But I mean, I've always read, when the page ended and the story was over, in my head, I'd put myself in the world and sort of see to keep the story going, because you don't want it to end, right? So, like, I think, we always, at some level, are telling stories. The question is, were we writing them down? At the time, I was doing so much academic writing that I didn't have time to write anything fiction. Or it would be the boredom. Like, I tried to write an epic poem in high school, and it was like torturous. If my mom ever finds it, she better burn it, because I don't want anyone else to read it. But it was like,
oh no,
really
I will
nice.
Pay her for it.
Don't tell her that. She might go through the attic.
I will pay her for it.
But like, it starts off really, really good, and I'm all the details, and then I'm like, okay, I'm bored with this, and then the last part of the quote epic poem is just done in like 5 stanzas. So I think we all have those when we're learning. But I also think, is this something you hit on a little bit about looking for purpose and escapism? I do think one of the, I don't want to say it's dilemma, I don't know if it's the right word. One of the issues that comes up in the first world, where we've solved so many problems and made life so easy, is you don't have that struggle and that sense of purpose for a lot of people. I mean, yeah, being a tax consultant's great. Sorry, Larry. But I mean, most people don't wake up when they're kids and be like, you know what I want to do when I grow up? I want to file IRS forms. Whereas, like, if there's not that aspirational aspect to our lives for most people, like there are exceptions, and I'm not taking away from those, but I think for people that just live in the mundane 9 to 5 sort of slog, fiction is their escape. It gives them stories about people with purpose.
Yeah.
You might not be able to be Homer and go on an Odyssey, but you can read about it.
You kidding?
Yeah.
I love it. I listen to audiobooks, and I go through about 30. Well, now that I like my coworker and he talks, and I have one that talks more, I only go through about 25 to 30 hours of audiobooks a week.
30 hours of audiobooks a week? Wow.
She's got all the badges on Audible. She's got
I really need to find somebody who just pays me in audiobooks.
Yeah. So it would be. But yeah, so I think there's something to be said for, for that value of story. Like, it allows us to do that. So I didn't quite crystallize it that way until you talked about, for you, it was the escapism and how it was sort of therapeutic for you. So sort of like all the dominoes lined up and it was like, aha. But anyway, so back to you.
I don't know what you're talking about. I will go and I will lock myself in a house in North Carolina and just read. I will literally turn off my cell phone and be like, anybody who needs to reach me has the house phone. Turn it off. I don't turn off the house phone. That's the promise. And I just
wink, nudge, nudge. But I can turn the ringer way down.
That's so awesome.
Let's make this about Todd again. Fahnestock.
I'm enjoying hearing your guys' stories.
I don't know. JR, can you say his last name yet?
I just said it. Fahnestock.
Nice. I noticed you rushed through it just in case if you got it wrong.
If I was wrong and you say it fast enough. So if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with bullshit, the NCO creed. So how did your love of speculative fiction as a genre and as a consumer of the product transition into you writing your own stories?
Yeah, so I wanted to essentially, it was such a wonder what I had been given when I was in my teens that I wanted to give that to somebody else, but also I wanted to be able to do that. Like that just seemed like the most magical thing in the world, to be able to create worlds. And I mean, the characters, a lot of the characters that I wrote were sort of grandified. Is that a word? I don't think that's a word, but anyways, I think you get my point. Grandified versions of what I wanted to be, I mean, like Wildmane, which is the title character of the first book in my Threadweaver series. Like, he's this demigod and he could do just about anything. And when I was essentially kind of thrust out into the world on my own, at a pretty young age, I wanted to be like that. I wanted to be somebody who could just handle anything, right? So Wildmane was the character I was writing during that time, and he could handle anything, right? And then, there have been characters like that throughout. I mean, now they tend to be much more a very specific part of my personality when I write them. I mean, every character an author writes is them in some way, or at least a little sliver of them. But back then it was more of this, almost like I was creating a blueprint that I wanted to follow, like, okay, here's a hero that I can believe in. I want to be like that guy. I want to have his moral code. I would love to have his powers. That's probably not going to happen, but one can dream. And so that was one of the reasons why I was writing it in the beginning.
So we're going to deviate a little bit from the program. So you've talked about all these iconic properties, and when you were listing what you read as a kid, I'm like, yep, check. That one too. Mm-hmm. So if you could write, and obviously ones you haven't, but if you could write in any of those iconic franchises now that you're a professional author yourself, which would it be and why?
Well, I did actually write in one of them. That's where I got my start. Dragonlance. Yeah. It was a strange situation, and I probably would write in Dragonlance again just because, that would be freaking awesome. But when, what was it? 1990, I want to say 1990. My mom had a boyfriend and she lived in Minnesota, and the boyfriend knew this guy named Gary Paulson, who may ring a bell for those of you who have read such wonderful books as Hatchet, which is a fantastic novel about a kid who is flying up to see his parents in Canada, and he's in this little single 2-seater airplane.
You and I have a very different definition of that book.
Oh, really? You don't like that book?
I really didn't want to read it. I really was very angry because my mother took away my Elizabeth Moon book until I finished it. I was very angry. I really wanted my Mercedes Lackey and Elizabeth Moon books back.
I mean, Mercedes Lackey she's awesome.
So
I mean, I read it later in life. But anyways, I'm just going off of a tangent that was spawned off of a tangent, and now we're on a tangent.
So yeah, you met the person who tortured my English class.
Yes, I did. So I met Gary Paulson, and I actually had an appointment to go out and see him, and I had to pay a dishwasher $5 to drop me off in the middle of nowhere, Minnesota. And I was walking with my brother word processor under my arm, which I don't know if you guys remember word processors before there were computers, but it was like, I don't know if you can see my hands in this. It was like 2 feet like wide by 3 feet long by 1 foot thick, right? Okay. Look, you just changed it out. Okay. So it was about this big by this tall by this thick, right? And it was heavy. And I was hauling this thing out into this farm where he lived. And I went in, I saw him, and we chatted for a little bit. And he's like, okay, so let me see your stuff. And so I opened up my word processor and I showed him, like, he's like, show me your best. And I showed him my favorite chapter, right? He's like, okay. He like looks at it, reads it for 15 seconds. He's like, show me the beginning. And I'm thinking, oh, he hates it. Because I mean, like, you can't possibly like something in 15 seconds, right? So I show him the very beginning. He reads that for about 5 seconds and he's like, okay. And he closes it up. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I'll just walk home the 12 miles back to town. And he's like, you're good. I want to put you in touch with somebody, though, because I don't do this sort of stuff. This is fantasy. So I've got a friend, Margaret Weiss, and she'll be able to help you out. And I was like, Margaret Weiss? He's like, yeah, do you know her? I'm like, well, do I know her? She writes the Dragonlance novels. How can you not know her? And he's like, oh, good. So you've read some of her stuff. And I'm just sitting there like vibrating with excitement. I'm practically going to, float out the door. And so that's how I got connected up with Margaret. And she like took a look at my first 5 chapters. It was great. She didn't get back to me for weeks and weeks. And finally she's like, well, I don't want to take the red pen to something unless you let me. I'm like, I'm letting you, like, take the red pen. So she like slashed the first 3 chapters, or like the chapter 2 through 4. And then that's how we started a relationship. Anyways, I published my first short story in 91 when I was in college. It's called Seekers, and it's in Dragonlance Tales 2, Volume 2, The Cataclysm. And then I published several other short stories, 2 other actually, to be precise, in Dragonlance, and then just started writing from there. So my answer, my very long-winded answer to your question is Dragonlance is what I would write it.
Okay.
Although it'd be cool to do a Xanth novel. I'm not going to lie. A Xanth novel would be a lot of fun.
Okay. That reminds me, you're talking about your experience with Weiss. And for one, your reaction to that when you were talking to Gary is how most people react to Doc when she starts just casually name dropping everyone she's met through DragonCon. It's like, oh, you mean Bob? We call him Bob over here, not Robert. I'm making it as I'm just grabbing a name randomly, like, people get that reaction to Doc a lot. So it's fun to see it from the other side from someone else.
I only know so many people named Todd.
I said Bob. I was just making a joke. Like, it didn't matter what the name was. But
there's certain names that there's only one. There's like only one Jody. And I look at people like, who did you think I met? There's only one person named Jody in this entire world, if you ask my brain.
Something like that. But that reminded me, like, you're talking about your first editing experience matches about mine. I even wrote, I don't even know if it's still up, but at the time I wrote about my first experience with a professional editor, and I called it something like Tears of Blood, or how I learned to bend over and take it like a man.
And say thank you, ma'am.
Something like that. But like, I could totally relate to that. Like, I like that chapter, and you're like, nope, gotta go.
It's gotta go. It's exposition.
Was it hard?
Cut it out.
Was it hard for you to take, or were you crying on the inside?
Well, I had asked her. She's like, she was very sweet about it. It's like, well, I don't, she was demurring, and finally I was like, do what you do. That's why I want you to do this. And then when she came back, she's like, okay, chapters 2, 3, and 4, take them all out. It was like, ugh, okay. But I mean, like, this was Margaret Weiss. I'm like, this is my chance. So I jumped through the hoops. I did everything I could. And of course.
And that is the wisdom. Because I have seen so many people go to mentor sessions and look at authors, huge name authors, and go, no, you're wrong. And they're like, well, okay,
Well,
have fun. You're never going to be on this side of the table with that attitude.
you know, to those people, I would just say the real gift is learning. The more you can learn, the better you're going to get. And to stand on your position and defend your stuff, there's a certain point at which you have to do that, but probably not with somebody who's trying to help you. You know, I mean, like the way that I do it when I actually edit other people's stuff, what I essentially give them a caveat. I'm like, you know what? There is no cosmic rubric for great writing. Some people like this, some people like this, some people like this, and everybody's got different opinions about it. You are the captain of your ship. As the writer, you're the captain. But as the captain, you got to bring in the best information possible. So if somebody gives you something and it doesn't ring a bell for you, it's just like, no, that is anathema, don't use it. If somebody gives you something and it rings a bell, but like it means lots of work and you don't want to do it and you'd rather it was better than that, you're just hurting yourself. You're just hurting yourself. Neil Gaiman has one of my favorite quotes ever. And he said, when somebody tells you that something doesn't work about your writing, they are almost always right. When somebody tells you how to fix it, they are almost always wrong. And I love that, because if something isn't working for somebody, they know that. You should listen to them when they say that. They're your reader and they're saying, yeah, it didn't work for me. And if they're your right demographic, you really need to listen to them. But if they tell you what you really need here is a dragon with a lollipop for a head, you know what I mean? Like, don't listen to them.
No, I beta read, and Mel Todd, who I will beta read for, sometimes she will call me back and she will go, what the hell did you mean? And I went, I don't know. What I know is this sentence is awkward. And I don't know if you're trying to say A or B.
That's super helpful.
And right? I'm like, I can't tell you what is wrong, or I can tell you what doesn't work. I'm not telling you how to fix it. I'm just telling you no.
Exactly. And the thing is, that is great because she's a professional. That's her job. Her job is to fix it. If you say it doesn't work, it's her job to look at it and see if she agrees. And if she agrees, then she's got to come up with a solution. That's the way that I would approach it anyways.
Oh, no, that's the way she definitely approaches it. Other than occasionally when she's like, why did you highlight this thing? I don't know. I was falling asleep. I think I highlighted it so I knew where I left off. And it's just like, could you have unhighlighted it then for me? No. Didn't occur to me.
Sometimes the readers, when they leave comments, that's one of the hardest part as an author is going through, is sometimes when they're leaving comments, they don't know why it didn't work, just that it didn't. So you have to sort of suss between the lines and see what they're trying to tell you.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. Or ask them, you know, I mean, like, I'm glad that she calls you. That's great, because then she can get your feedback just straight from you.
Well, she calls me because we really don't live together, despite popular rumors.
She sends me torture pictures of food I can never eat because she lives too far away.
Well, I jokingly call her and are like, "Did Cisca check her email? She doesn't live here."
She just sends me what I jokingly call food porn, and it's pictures of all the things she cooks, the meats, and she's got like a slow cooker. What's it called, Doc?
She has a smoker.
Smoker. There we go. She sends
a slow cooker, if it's smoking, is a problem.
You know, I forget the word sometimes. Anyway, back to Todd, because this is the Todd hour, and we get distracted.
Food poisoning one day.
Yeah, one of these days. So many authors let their own real life experiences influence the stories they tell. So, were there any specific formidable moments you think, besides your parents' divorce, that shaped you as a storyteller?
Gosh, I mean, that was the big one, but everything, you know, I mean, like, I had this group of friends in college, and that gave rise to a lot of found family kind of stories. The adventures that I took. In fact, you know, one of the books that I wrote, Summer of the Fetch, is actually 25% autobiographical. It is a fantasy novel, no question, but it starts in Durango. The kid's 17. His family has kind of flown apart. He's living in the house that he grew up in, and it's about to be foreclosed upon. All that's true. Like, that all happened to me. But of course, he goes on this road trip where he meets, you know, a mystical fetch that's going to make him invincible over the course of the summer. The price, of course, is that he's going to die on the eve of his 18th birthday. So that part was not real. And, you know, amazing.
I think you made it past 18.
I did. I totally made it past 18. Yep. So
and 2018.
so yeah, lots of influence. And then actually my one nonfiction book, Ordinary Magic, is just straight truth from my son and I hiked 450 miles over the Rocky Mountains from Denver all the way to Durango in 5 weeks. And I wrote the story. I wrote down the story. So we almost died a couple of times.
That sounds exhausting.
Did you get eaten by a bear?
Did we get eaten by a bear? No, we almost got hit by lightning.
Oh.
We were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and lightning was booming right next to us. And we were running for our lives, literally running, trying to escape lightning. And then I almost fell off a cliff. That was the other one.
Having been a professional hiker in the infantry, I get that people do it for fun, but I just don't get it at the same time.
No,
I enjoy camping, but it's the long hikes that I don't get.
I used to love backpacking, and then I joined the Army.
And they ruined it for you.
Well, they ruined a lot of things for me, my hip included. So.
All right. But that's cool that you wrote it down. Were you recording it like with a recorder or something as you were going?
I was kind of voice recording notes as I went along. I came up with like 5 novel ideas, and none of them were the book that I wrote when I got back. I wrote the actual story. But yeah, it helped me, those notes, because I would write down things that would happen and people that we would meet and the names. People on the trail, they come up with trail names, most of them. So we had like names like Pufferbelly and Starfail and Xanadu and, there's all kinds of really kind of cool, crazy names. And so every time we got to a new interesting name, I would always write it down, and eventually it just became practice. So yeah, that helped a lot.
So this is one of the takeaways that I've gotten from a lot of the authors I know that write really well, is there's something to be said for getting away from the keyboard and leaving your bedroom or your office or whatever and living life, because it makes you write about life a little bit better.
Yes.
Not everyone can be Emily Dickinson and hide in their cave and write novels people read 100 years later.
Oh, there's a time for hiding in the cave, for sure. I've hidden in my cave plenty, but you're right. Going out and experiencing life like that reinvigorates me every time. Every time. Even though when I get on a roll, like the last thing I want to do, thank God I've got a wife that like pops in when I'm in the middle of, writing and goes, Taekwondo in, 5 minutes, come with me to Taekwondo. I'm like, no, I can't today. She's like, okay, I'm leaving in 5 minutes. And of course, once the earworm goes in, then I'm like, oh, I should probably go get some exercise. Okay, I'm going to get up, I'm going to go. And so I'll rush to catch up with her. Maybe a third of the time, not all the time.
Or occasionally throwing food. That's always helpful from a spouse.
Yes.
I got told that was mean, but it may.
We're not throwing it at them. Literally, it was like a metaphor for just giving them food, Doc. You don't actually throw the food at them.
Oh, I thought it was because it was an MRE.
No. At least it's still sustenance. But I mean, you're not supposed to actually hit them with the food unless it's a food fight. And then
I never hit what I'm aiming for, which may have been the problem because I wasn't aiming for them.
So here's a question: since you wrote about that hike, or at least it inspired the story, your son was with you. Is he old enough to read the stories that you write for this one?
Oh yeah, well, he was 14 when we hiked the trail.
So if he read the story, would he recognize the trip in it, or would it still seem so different to him?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like, I'm sure he was focused on different things than I was focused on, but yeah, I mean, all the things that were, like there's a lot of internal monologue from me during it, but then of course there were the items that happened along the way. He would recognize all the items, I'm sure, along the way.
Cool.
He's not going to forget running from lightning anytime soon. I'll tell you that.
One would hope.
I'm pretty sure that would make a great college essay.
If you've never been in a place where lightning is like coming down real close to you, you have no idea how loud it is. Like that first strike when we were just sitting there, we're funneling, filtering water and sitting by the stream, and all of a sudden, ba-boom! I mean, like, it was so loud that we both just jumped and thought we were already dead. At which point Dashiell looks at me. That Dashiell's my son's name. He's like, that's not good. I'm like, okay, so don't panic. He's like, Dad, I'm panicking. I'm like, we're like grabbing stuff and throwing it in packs, and I'm putting my shoes on. I mean, like, we were all set up to rest for like 30 minutes, and then we were running. And I won't even get into the blisters that were on my feet at that point. I made huge mistakes in the first 2 weeks, and I paid for it. Just paid for it. And I had to run with those feet. It was.
Oh, every hiker knows this pain.
Change your socks. Drink water.
Exactly. And I didn't. I walked through a rainstorm and was like, I'll be fine. That was day 2. Idiot. So learned some good, valuable lessons for sure.
Okay. But transitioning into the writing side, but those are great because they definitely give you context, particularly since hiking is a huge thing in epic fantasy.
Right?
It really is.
Gave me a whole new perspective on the hobbits going to Mordor, you know?
She actually tells a story about her dad falls asleep on like one of the Lord of the Rings movies and wakes up on the last one and says, "Are they still walking?"
Yes.
That still makes me laugh, and I've heard her tell that story a dozen times.
Still walking. Yes, the whole movie.
One day, my dad might actually listen to this podcast and look at me and go, "Really, Cisca? Really?"
What I don't get is no one's giving me a satisfactory answer on why they just didn't ride the birds and just like circumvent all of this.
That's because there is no satisfactory answer any more than there is, what do the orcs eat in Mordor aside from themselves? I mean, like, there are no crops. You never see any kind of
That's why they raid things.
Apparently, they're also magical beings, so maybe they don't need to eat.
Right. Until meat's back on the menu, of course.
Until meat's back on the menu, right.
Well, I mean, if meat's on the menu. So, now that we're getting away from long pork references, transitioning into things from the writing side and the fan angle.
Yes.
Have you had any cool fan art or a cosplay of one of your pieces yet?
Okay, so Colorado Springs Comic-Con last year, these 2 wonderful young people, I think they were teens. One of them was maybe 18, the other one was 16, something like that. They came up and asked for my spiel. So I stand at my Comic-Con booth and I give spiels about my books. And I gave spiels about my books and they had stars in their eyes. They just were really, I mean, you can tell the people that get really into it by they get this sort of like glimmer in their eyes. And they each bought a book. And then we were best friends, right? And they were like going out and telling everybody about my booth. They had to come, you had to come over here and you had to get the spiel. And then one of them was like, "I'm going to cosplay your character tomorrow because I'm coming back to the con tomorrow." And she came back, they came back and they were like decked out as Gruffy the Griffin, which is one of the characters in my one of my stories. And it was this sort of like this, it wasn't like they had created a realistic costume. It was more iconic, right? Like with, feathers on the fingers and like the right color of clothing and like some makeup on their face. It was amazing. And then I told them I was going to be at Denver Comic-Con, and if they wanted to come up and cosplay up there, I would, I'd give them my table pass because they would go out and like hand out cards and things like that. And they both showed up as like full cosplay characters, one from Tower of the Four, one from Fair Mist, and they were both just spot on. Like they were the characters. It was such an amazing experience. It was great. Yeah.
Was any of your family there to get to see that?
No, but I have pictures.
Life?
No, but I have pictures. And in fact, one of them, that's kind of how I picture the character Adora now. She just nailed it, just completely.
Nice.
That is super awesome. So you've obviously had people ask for your autograph, but what was that first time like?
The first time somebody ever asked for my autograph was when I was in college, 1992, at Walden Books in the Citadel Mall in Colorado Springs. And it was just the most adorable thing. It was my Dragonlance anthology, and my story in the Dragonlance anthology. And this kid comes in, and I'm just sitting there because like nobody knows who I am, right? So I'm sitting there behind this table and it's empty in Walden Books. And this kid comes in and he's like looking at some stacks and he's kind of looking at me out of the corner of his eye. And then he go over and look at some other stacks. And then I just happened to notice that he had this like tattered copy of the Dragonlance Tales 2, Volume 2, The Cataclysm in his hands. And finally he mustered up the nerve to walk up to me and he's like, "Well, will you sign my book?" I'm like, "Absolutely, I'll sign your book." And he kind of set it down and I signed it for him. I'm like, "Thanks so much." And I handed it back to him and he stood there for a second and he started to turn away. And then he looked back at me. He's like, "Yours was the best story." And then he ran out of the bookstore. It was the most adorable thing ever. And I will never forget that. I will never forget it. I don't even remember his name.
I don't think you had time to get his name. But if he is listening, because obviously he is a reader, you do remember him.
I do. I remember him clearly.
And if he's listening, you should sign up for your newsletter, and then maybe you can reply and you can continue the conversation. And
that would be amazing. That would be
so
amazing.
abruptly ended.
I would love that.
We'll link it in the show notes.
I mean, we're probably almost the same age now. He was probably, I don't know, 12, 13, and I was like 22. So like now he'd be in his 40s. So I mean, we're much closer to the same age now than back then.
Life and math is funny that way.
That's not how the math works.
Sure it is, Doc. Just go with it.
Did I not do that math right? I'm not surprised. I don't math very well. I mean, if I was 22 and he was 12, then now I'd be 53 and he'd be 43. Doesn't that work? No, it's not.
It'd still be the same number of years apart. Developmentally closer.
Yeah, but developmentally, like, I mean, come on, we're both sort of middle-aged, I'd like to think.
So yes, 50 and 40 are closer together than 10 and 20 or Absolutely. 20 and 30. Life experience makes the difference. It's about more than just the raw math talk. It's about the life lived.
And come on, the percentage of years that we've lived is much closer than before, right? No, am I wrong?
Yeah. Okay, we're going on.
Doc is going to think in her head. She's like, that's not how math works. That's not how any of this works.
Math. I'm just going to embarrass myself.
Hi.
Too late. Okay. Too late.
It's okay. You're fine. So you've obviously spotted somebody reading your books out in the wild. So, but what was your funniest fan interaction?
Funniest
or weirdest?
Somebody asked me to sign their chest once. That was kind of weird.
How did your wife do?
I was about to ask the same question. That would be awkward.
She laughed. She thought that was funny.
You were a lucky man. That could have gone badly.
It's signing on skin is way different than signing on paper. I totally botched the signature anyways. I did my best, but
I hope they didn't tattoo that then.
I'm hoping not to.
So, the next question is JR.
Yep. I just thought you were going to ad-lib something. All right. So, this is where we talk about everything Todd has written. Can you give us the Reader's Digest version of your body of works?
Sure.
Obviously, Dragonlance.
Yep. Dragonlance was where I got my start, and I did a few short stories in that. After that, the next published series that I have is the Fair Mist series. It starts with, it's called the Whisper Prince series. Starts with Fair Mist, and it continues with the Undying Man, and I'm in the middle of the Slate Wizards, which is the third and final of that. And it's interesting because that was one of my early on ones, but I've done so much in between, and the sequels to that keep getting pushed off. It's like sort of the neglected stepchild of my writing. But anyways, so there's that series, and then there is the Wildmane series, the Threadweavers series is the name of the series, but Wildmane is the first book, so I always call it the Wildmane series. This was a concept that I came up with when I was in high school, wrote the first book in college, finished it later when I was living in New York, finished the trilogy, and then rewrote the whole thing top to bottom in 2018 and released it. And it is a series of my heart, and that is like my young passion coming out in stories with a more of a modern set of skills writing. So I love that story. And that is my bestseller. I go to cons and that is what sells, hands down, is my best selling series at cons. And then the Tower of the Four series, which was a finalist for the Colorado Book Award last year and won the Colorado Authors League Award for writing excellence last year. So it got some attention last year, which was pretty cool. And that is a fun series. It's a fan favorite of mine. I get lots of people that really love that series a whole bunch. And then after that, I got connected up with, in between there were what I call my one-offs. I've got a time travel novel, a single time travel novel, my 1980s rock climbing road trip coming of age story with a twist of magic. I don't even know what genre that is. That I just created a genre just exactly for that. And then my nonfiction book that I mentioned to you, the Colorado Trail book. Those are what I call my one-offs. Like every now and then I get a wild hair and I have to write this particular thing, and it has nothing to do with my epic fantasy series. And then, of course, Eldros Legacy. When I tumbled into Eldros Legacy, it's just fabulous. This this multi-author shared fantasy world project where there are 5 founders, as I mentioned before, who are creating this meta plot story that's going to be like the Marvel universe, right? So we've got each of our individual storylines kind of rising up, and then at a certain point they're going to come together. At book 4, we're each going to write 8 books, so that's 40 books over 8 years. And at book 4, our plots are going to start intermixing. You'll get a lot of foreshadowing in the early books, but then our main characters are going to start interacting with one another, and it's ambitious and it's amazing. And actually, Khyven the Unkillable is the first book in the Eldros Legacy, and that's mine, Khyven the Unkillable, and it also is up for, we don't know whether it won yet or not, but up for a Colorado Book Award and the Colorado Authors League Award for Writing Excellence. Also.
Now, that's also the one that is eligible for a Dragon Award, right?
Yes. So read it and nominate it, please. That would be super cool. And it's got a lot of steam behind it right now. There's a lot of buzz about it behind the scenes, but if you haven't read it and you like high fantasy, sword and sorcery, you're going to love it. You're going to love it.
All right. Well, since you answered that question about the origin story for the book, we're going to move on for a second. We're going to pause while we shamelessly shill for the man. Or woman, Doc, because I'm inclusive like that.
Having taken her father's throne, Sarah Calhoun has fallen out with one of her best allies, and her brother Nathaniel heads into Imperial Philadelphia with a reckless plan. Her uncle Thomas, armed with new powers and new allies, aims to remove Sarah from her throne and from the world of the living. To survive, and to gain the strength she needs to fight an impossible war, Sarah must unite the Mound Builder Kings to enact an ancient rite that will propel her beyond mortality. Servant Daughter by D.J. Butler is the newest entry in the Dragon Award-winning Witchy War series. From Baen Books at BaenBooks.com.
Ooh.
I love that series, by the way. Just saying.
It's great. And Butler is great. Dave Butler is just, he's a great guy.
He has an amazing talent for writing accents into print. If that makes any sense. Like, you can read it and you know there's an accent going on in there.
Yeah.
It makes it a challenge to read, but it's really worth it. So.
Okay, so before we dig in, we're going to take a moment. We're going to look at this cover art. And so if you can tell us the story behind this cover art. Let me put that on the screen.
Well, do you want me to tell you the hook for the story, or do you want me to tell you the story behind the cover art?
The cover art first, and then we'll get into the hook for the story.
Okay, cool. So my cover artist is an amazingly talented fellow. His name is Rashid Alakroka, and he's Kuwaiti. He lives in Kuwait. And I met him through my writing coworker, Chris Mandeville's son's. He was Chris Mandeville's son's roommate in college. They knew each other in college, and he studied to be an engineer. And while he was waiting to get his posting to become an engineer in Kuwait, he was messing around with all this art stuff that he loved. And so Chris said, because I was looking for covers that were inexpensive at the time for my Wildmane series, and Chris was like, "This guy's really good. You should give him a chance." I'm like, "Okay, I'll check him out." I mean, I wanted something that was professional level, so I didn't know if I just wanted to grab some college student who thought he could draw and give him a try. But I was like, "Okay, I'll give it a shot." I mean, I can't be choosy. I only have a few $100 to spend per cover, and so I started talking with him, and he's like, let me do these for free for you. He showed me some of his work, and I was like, okay, this is way better than I thought. He's like, let me do these for free. These are my first covers. Just let me do them for you for free. And I insisted on paying him, and it was a pittance. It was like $110 per cover at the time, right? But he's like, let me just do these for you for free because I'm not that good yet. And clearly he was already amazingly good. And I tell you, it was the best $440 I'd ever spent, because then we started developing this relationship, and he does every cover that I do. This was his almost latest, because the second one is coming out in just a couple of weeks in this particular arm of Eldros Legacy. And I told him I wanted this action pose. This guy's a gladiator, and he is going to be swinging swords through the whole novel. Can you show me something where he's got mismatched armor and, throw a flash of color in there, but most of it's going to be steel, right? And so this is what he came up with. And what I love about Rashid, I mean, obviously there's so much movement in this painting. His ability, his grasp on composition is just phenomenal. But scroll in again, like come close on the shoulder plate, come close on the ring mail that he's got, down there. I mean, like he's got scratches in there on that down there, the ring mail, all this stuff. The way his fist is wrapped around the dagger, and then whatever that is, this little like half glove or something that you can see it between his fingers. I mean, details like that make a freaking cover. And I just look at the pommel of the sword there with the little strings wrapped around it. I mean, like, this is the kind of stuff you get when you're working with Rashid. I didn't tell him to do any of that stuff, not to mention the blue glow of the light that's kind of undershadowing the armor there. I mean, all of this stuff. And the thing he does the best, I mean, obviously he does all of that phenomenally well, but the thing he does the best is faces. You can just look at this face of Kaivan here, and you know what kind of person he is, the intensity of it. So anyways, obviously I'm in love with my cover artist, and I hope he never leaves me. He's just so phenomenal. I tell him he's going to be the next Frazetta. Like, he keeps going and improving at the rate that he's improving. Like,
I mean, he's got some Michael Whalen potential right there.
Absolutely. Yep. Michael Whalen was one of my favorite artists when I was a kid. So that's no wonder that you just said that, because I see that as well. That's yeah.
So what's the story of the little let me go back and I'll zoom in. This little icon that's at the bottom. So at the top, we've got the branding, much like the Dragonlance. You've got the branding for the series.
Yes.
But then at the bottom, you've got this little symbol. What's the story of that?
You mean this symbol here?
Well, it's
I'm on the image.
Can you not see it?
Hold on, let me give you full screen.
Yes, it's the same symbol. Yes.
Exact same symbol. So yes, I'm wearing this. I'll tell you about that.
Hold on, we can't see it. Can you show it one more time?
Okay, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, that symbol. What's the story?
So, okay, so each of the founders has a continent, and each of the continents has a symbol. This is the symbol for my continent, which is called Noxanon. There is also Draconon, Pyranon, Daemonon, and Shigurin. So they all have different symbols. Do you want to see the different symbols? Because I have all the coins except for one.
Sure, let me put you back on the
Why are
full
you
screen.
missing one? What did you do? Lose it?
Well, I think we should blame Quincy for that. Quincy J. Allen for that, because he hasn't mailed it to me yet. Or I think he just mailed it to me. But this one is Draconon.
You do know this means I'm going to try and con it out of him at Con Carolina.
Well, we do sell them. So, yes, you could probably...
It's more fun to just con Quincy into giving me things.
I bet you could. Hang on a second. Let me get this one out of its wrapper. This is Shigurin.
Cool. So far, I'm liking yours the best.
Oh, thank you for that. And then this is Pyranon. I don't have Daemonon, but hang on a second. I do have Seeds of Dominion, which... Okay, so here we go. Here's Pyranon.
Oh, that's kind of cool, too. I like that one.
Yep. It's really cool. I love them all. There we go.
It reminds me of a Dracula thing.
Oh, yeah. Okay, and then... Hang on.
But I've been seeing a lot of Dracula stuff in my Facebook page because it's the 125th anniversary of Dracula this week.
So this is Seeds of Dominion, which is the second book in the overall series and the first book of his line. So hang on a second. You can see maybe the
Is that like the
symbol.
first of his line? Sorry.
Yes,
Yeah.
The first of his line. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So that's that one. So yeah, those are the 5. And so each continent has its own storyline that is building up right now with its Dungeons and Dragons style party of characters. Like, each of us is building this party of characters. So it's very Dungeons and Dragons style type of fiction. And you noted that the Eldros Legacy is similar to like Dragonlance logo, similar to maybe Forgotten Realms logo. That's not an accident. That was the kind of feeling we wanted to evoke. This is the kind of stories that these are.
Okay.
And I could see that cover on a Barnes & Noble shelf.
So the other thing that branding does, because I had actually considered that with one of the series that I had done with Chris Weiner before he ended up taking a break from writing, so it's sort of languishing. But by doing that branding at the top, you're branding it in 3 ways. Your typography for your name.
Stop.
What happened?
She told me to shut up. I thought she was going to say something.
No, you're going into like in-depth, like.
I find it fascinating. I like how he did that.
Okay.
You're telling me I'm boring you. I get it. You could just say you're boring.
I thought I did.
Yeah, you're fired. Todd, you want a job?
He doesn't pay very well.
Wait till we get that booze company to sponsor us. Then we'll have people beating down the door. All right, Doc.
It's a good thing you're not cute.
So let's talk about the book.
Yes, I know. We're going to talk about the book. So what is your 30-second elevator pitch for this book?
All right, I'll try and keep it to 30 seconds. It might go a little long. Okay, so Khyven the Unkillable is about a gladiator on a hot streak. He is so called with this flamboyant moniker because he has fought 48 bouts in the Night Ring, which is this world's Colosseum, and he has won 48 bouts. That is unheard of. So they are calling him Khyven the Unkillable, right? If he wins 50 bouts, he is elevated from slave to knight. He gets the entourage, he gets the land, he gets to marry the Baron's daughter, he gets the whole 9 yards, right? He wins his 49th bout, and the king invites him to dinner and yanks the rug out from underneath him. He says, Khyven, we're not going to do a normal bout for your 50th. I want you to do something special for me. I got a new plan for you. So in the woods somewhere that I cannot locate, there is a rebel camp led by this woman who styles herself as the Queen in Exile. One of her recruiters is in the cells of the Night Ring right now. He wants to recruit you, and I want you to let him. And then I want you to let him take you to their camp. Then I want you to come back here and you tell me, and I'm going to smash this rebellion to smithereens. That will be your 50th bout. And Khyven's like, you got it, boss. I'm on it. So he goes with the recruiter. He goes to the secret camp and he meets the Queen in Exile. She is charming. She is brilliant. She is an amazing leader. And he likes her. She's a good person. She's way better than that guy back in the castle there. So now Khyven has a problem. Either he goes back and gets everything he ever wanted, or he signs up for a losing cause for all the right reasons. I won't tell you what he chooses, but that's the hook for the story.
Well, JR, what do you think?
I like it. I like it.
JR is now going to ask when he can get the audiobook for it.
No, actually, financial times are hard. I'm doing the library route right now, so you just got to get it into the library for me, please.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, it's possible I can get you a complimentary copy. Just
outstanding.
Let's talk afterwards.
JR, see, some people like you.
It's not you.
So we've actually talked a lot about what makes this series special, and that it's a compliment. I wouldn't put up with you for 4 years if I didn't like you on some level, JR. Took me a second to realize that what you said, but you've talked about how it's these almost 5 converging story arcs. So it is 5. But what? So normally we'd ask that, but what really makes this story like special? What tropes are you hitting on and playing with?
Oh, okay. So, I mean, this is a classic hero's journey. Khyven the Unkillable starts out as a character that we kind of like because he's flamboyant and he's really good at what he does. But he's not the most moral of people. Like, he is really just trying to get power for himself. We start to find out, though, that there's a reason he's doing this. He's lost 2 families so far because he wasn't powerful enough to stop them from being killed. So he wants to not only become the best swordsman in the land, but he also wants to accrue some social power so that there is never going to be a time where knights will break down his door and take the people that he loves, right? But in doing so, he's kind of made sure that he doesn't love anybody also. And this is his journey to kind of find his family again. What he wants is to not have to be afraid anymore, right? What he needs is to find his new family. That's this classic trope for Khyven. And we're kind of rooting for him, and then he makes stupid decisions, and then we're cursing him, and then he makes some good decisions, and we're rooting for him again. So that's the fun interplay of this. Not to mention the fact that the world is amazing and unique, right? I mean, like, there's so many really cool, interesting monsters and characters. I mean, this was supposed to be a Dungeons and Dragons style adventure, which means, you know, lots of dungeon crawling. Like, we're going into places that we've never been before, and there's going to be monsters there. And something that I haven't mentioned yet about the world building in this continent was ruled once by giants. That's a big through line of all of these stories. As long ago, the giants ruled the land. And these are not brutish, thug type giants. These are like an advanced race kind of giants. They are extremely magical, extremely powerful, and they built these fantastic civilizations thousands of years ago. At a certain point in history, there was an uprising amongst the mortals and the humans against these giants who treated them like slaves. They won, and the giants have vanished for 1,700 years. Now they're coming back and they want their continents back. And so that is the meta plot that we're moving towards, right? So in this particular continent, Noxanon, long ago, the giants used to fight each other before the mortals rose up to try and hurt them, right? The giants used to fight each other. And during one of these giant wars, the Noxanoi, the giants who live on Noxanon, created a spell over the whole continent. Essentially, they bathed the continent in night, eternal night, and then they gave themselves all the advantages to work in the dark, so that if anybody tried to come attack them, they would have an extreme home field advantage right from the get-go. Well, the Pyronon giants threw a sun, like a miniature sun called the Lux, right in the middle of this spell, and it broke the spell apart. So now, thousands of years later, this continent is strewn with these patches of darkness called noctums. And nobody goes in there. You go in there, you die, because there's nothing but predators inside the noctums, but they don't come into the daylight. So as long as you leave the noctums alone, you're fine. If you take natural light into the noctum and try and see something, it is like they come to it like moths to flames, and they tear you apart, right? The only way to safely navigate a noctum is if you have magical light that you can generate yourself, or if you have an amulet of Noxanon, which look just like this. And that enables you to see in the darkness, and it protects you from the monsters for a certain period of time. So anyways, that's just a piece of the world building that Kaivan has to handle and deal with throughout the course of the story.
Okay. Doc, you got anything to add? I see you're thinking.
No.
I see your thinking face. You're burning up the screen.
So what? This really sounds very classic. Like, JR loves to ask about subgenres, but this just seems like a very classic Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, and beautiful. There's definitely fresh stuff. I'm not by any means saying there isn't anything new and fresh in it, but it definitely seems like a very classic high epic fantasy. Like, I wouldn't say it fits into any other subgenre other than like epic fantasy. Classic.
Absolutely. Sword and sorcery, maybe. There's definitely a lot of sorcery and a lot of swords flashing around. But yes, this is, that was the intention. That's what we were going for. I mean, I would also classify it as high fantasy, not dark fantasy. I mean, like, the notion is that the good guys win in the end in these books.
Yeah. So
do you stick with, because you talk about high fantasy versus dark fantasy, do you stick with the idea that good is good and bad is bad? Or do you go with the modernism, which is, well, it's all about your perspective, and sometimes the bad guy might be the good guy if you just hug him enough?
Definitely more the former.
If you hug me enough, I will be the bad guy.
I will be the bad guy.
Well, I think there's value, at least in literature. Like, obviously life is complicated and there are shades of gray, but in literature there's value in good being good and evil being evil, so you can teach those lessons through story, right?
Yes, there's definitely morality play here, and we fall on the good side, but there are some characters that straddle the line. There's one that I can think of specifically. His name is Nevelos, and he's a giant. So he should be one of the bad guys, but his mission is to help the mortals win. He's like, by his own kind, he's called the betrayer because he chose the other side, right? But this guy is not a good guy. He's on our side, but he's not a good guy. He will happily sacrifice 100 people to save the one that he thinks is going to promote the plan to save humanity overall. And he doesn't hesitate. He's got no remorse. He doesn't have human emotions like we would know human emotions. So is he a good guy? He's definitely on our side. But is he a good guy? No, he's not. So I do have characters like that. But no, I don't personally go in for the whole the bad guy is not the bad guy, right? I mean, like, there are different shades of that, but I like to have good solid villains where you look at them and you're like, boy, I want to put my hands around that guy's neck and squeeze. Those are the villains that I want to create. I want you to hate them.
Okay. The if you play a story where for the most part you're sticking good is good and bad is bad, then when you have the character that skirts those lines, it makes them stand out more and be even more impactful, which is the benefit of knowing where the lines are. So I dig it.
I agree.
And so now for the story itself, you've told us a lot about the main character. Is there anything that you wanted to add that you haven't already said before we move on? Because I don't want to like beat a dead horse.
Yeah, no, I think I've given the highlights. I mean, any more, and I'm going to start dropping spoilers here and there.
And obviously, it's a spoiler-free zone. We want people to buy and read the book. Okay, so what about secondary characters? Were there any that were especially memorable? And especially memorable to you?
Yes, and especially in the second book, which, like I said, is going to come out in a couple of weeks. It's called Laurel of the Dark. But in the first book, I love the Queen in Exile. She really kind of brought herself to life. She is this sort of chaotic good leader who seems so reckless and yet always seems to come up, fresh as a daisy, right? I mean, she's leading this almost impossible attack and nothing gets her down. Like she's like constantly strategizing everything. Even though it seems like she's kind of devil-may-care and reckless, she's not. She's actually put it all together in her head, and she's moving in a very specific direction. So I love her character. I also like Laurel, who is the love interest for Khyven, and she is a luminant. So that is my world's version of elves. Now these luminants, all of these specialized mortal races were created by giants to do specific tasks within the Noctum. So they all have light and dark type powers, right? And so luminants are elves. They've got the pointed ears. They are tall, kind of Tolkien-esque elves. And their hair lights up when they are emotional. Okay, so if they're sad, their hair will light up. If they're angry, their hair will light up. And this was used for them to navigate their way in the Noctum, right? So this is not a type of light that will bring the monsters running to destroy it, right? It is a magical kind of light. And so she's just been a really fun character to play. In addition, she is less dense. Like she's almost 6 feet tall. I think she may be actually 6 feet tall. And she weighs 80 pounds. So it's like her bones are less dense, her muscle is less dense, but no less strong. So it makes them extremely acrobatic, right? Their strength to body weight is way higher than a human's. However, if a human gets a hold of them, it's really hard for them to get away, right? Because they have no inertia to fight with, right? They don't have any kind of bulk to fight with. So they're a very interesting kind of race and character. And I really love the way that she is in the story. And in fact, luminants have this aspect about their souls. So when they come of age, they have to bond for life with a mate. And essentially they rip off half their soul, give it to their mate. Their mate rips off half their soul, gives it to them, and they bond forever in this really tight bond. So she may accidentally bond with somebody if she's too emotional about something. So Laurel is very contained. She doesn't want to bond with a human because it will probably kill her, because humans and luminants cannot bond the same way that luminants and luminants can bond. So it's a special aspect of her character that I just love.
So based on the low density, did you describe them almost avian then?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I actually kind of took the idea from one of the comic books that I loved to read when I was a kid. I don't know if you remember, if you're a Marvel fan, if you remember Longshot, the character Longshot. So he was a genetically, and what's that?
I don't remember that one.
Okay. He was a genetically engineered man who was made to be less dense. And so he had the same musculature as humans, but he was much lighter than humans. And so it made him extremely acrobatic, like Spider-Man level acrobatic. But he, every time he'd get hit, he would fly across the room. So I was like, I want to do something like that. So I kind of recreated that idea here in Eldros Legacy.
Okay, so what about the bad guys? Obviously, we don't want spoilers, but what can you tell us about the bad guy without giving away the plot?
So the King Vamrith is the bad guy, And he is a man who is very ambitious and has gotten to the top of the heap. He is the perfect tyrant. Like he frightens people where he needs to and lavishes gifts upon them when he needs to. And he's just a son of a bitch is what he is. You'll like the chapter 2 is where you see him relating to this woman that he is using to get something that he wants, and you just walk out of that chapter. I mean, I love that chapter because it's like, well, there's no question that this guy's the bad guy. He's just, I don't want to ruin anything because it's a really good chapter, but yeah, he's a man you love to hate.
The best kind of bad guys.
Yep.
And you're still going to get some contrarian who's like, I'm on team whatever the bad guy's name is.
I'd love to hear your rationale for that. Like, I would actually love someone to say, yeah, no, Vamrith's my guy. I like him because fill in the blanks, man. Fill in the blanks. I'd love to hear
the most memorable ones are the guys that write the rationale why the Jedis are the terrorists and the Empire are the good guys. You need to make the series big enough that someone will spend the time rationing that out for you.
That would be fun. I would love that. I would love that. I read an interview with Orson Scott Card once where he was talking about how people were like, Ender's Game is the best Orson Scott Card novels. No, Speaking for the Dead is the best. And they're like, so which do you think? Like, which side do you come down upon? He's like, I don't care. I would love for everybody to just be discussing which one's better to the end of time. Like, that's fine with me. So I love that answer. That's a great answer.
So speaking of which character is better, if your characters met you in a dark alley and they knew who you were, how do you think you'd fare with that?
I probably would die. They probably would kill me. Why did you put me through this hell? One of my super fans, Becca, she was like, so because she's one of my advanced readers as well, and she's like, reading a current novel that I'm working on. She's like, so I'm just waiting for the point at which this character gets maimed, because Todd, because everybody goes through the ringer in my books. I'm not particularly nice to my characters. They go through a lot for sure. And so I think if I met them in a dark alley, Kaivan would probably kill me because that's kind of his go-to thing. Like, he kills people. that's what he's good at, right? I would probably get shot, and put to sleep by Laurel. She carries this blowgun that has a sleeping poison on it called Somnol that puts people to sleep just like that. So I'd probably get put to sleep or killed. I would rather go out Laurel's way than Kaivan's, but that's probably what would happen.
Well, at least you know how you die.
Right. It's for whatever consolation that's worth. I don't know.
So do you have a favorite character archetype?
I love swordsman. I love the idea of somebody wielding a sword. So as far as archetypes, I don't typically build my characters off specific archetypes, but I think they fall into that anyway. So yeah, I don't know that I intentionally build them to be archetypes. So I don't think I can say I have a favorite archetype. Obviously swordsman is not a classic archetype, but maybe the farm boy who grows into his powers, a Luke Skywalker kind of archetype. I do like that one a lot.
So
that is a good one, although it's pretty classic. I think it's used in a lot of fantasy and sci-fi, actually.
Oh yeah,
the farm boy made big.
Yep.
So it's a trope for a reason because it works. It speaks to the quest for more. But Doc is telling me to shut up and move on. So were there any cool scenes or ideas that you had to cut from this book that make a cool story?
So that's interesting that you asked that. I can't think of a cool scene that I had to cut, but I can think of a scene that I was going to cut. Like, I was 95% sure I was going to cut. There is this scene with this giant raven, and I had to have this sort of boss monster thing, and Kaivan meets this giant raven in this Naragi. The Naragi is the name for a kind of ruined castle, like something that the giants built a long time ago that nobody has entered since then. Sort of these old castles. So so he was going into this room, and I'm like, I need a boss monster, and just like this giant raven popped out of my head. And so this raven is this very cultured, I kind of picture him with an English accent, and he's like, talking to Kaivan about how it's so wonderful to see someone and talk with someone, and I hope you don't mind that we have this conversation before I eat you, right? And Kaivan's like, backing up, going like, well, I don't really want you to eat me. It's like, well, it's inevitable. You may as well resign yourself to your fate. I mean, like, here I am trapped here for 1,000 years, looking after my master's castle. Do you think I wanted that fate? Of course not. But do I live with it? Of course I do. So you must accept your fate as well. And let's just have a nice conversation before I devour you. Anyways, when I got done writing the scene, I'm like, this is never going to fly. I've got like, dark big bird here. I got to come up with something else. People are going to freaking hate this character. There's no way this flies. And so I was this close to cutting it before I showed it to everybody, but I'm like, you know what? I'm going to put it out and see what they think. So I put it out to my alpha reader list, which was, I think, 3 or 4 people at the time. And straight across the board, he was the fan favorite. This giant raven, this Ravalos character was the fan favorite. And so I was so close to essentially deleting something that readers obviously loved. And it makes me, that moment in time, it sticks in my head. It makes me nervous to cut anything now. Like, what if it's the good thing that I'm cutting out of the story? So anyway, so yeah, that's the story that jumped into my mind when you asked about cutting scenes.
That reminds me, that scene that you described, a lot of some of the classics where like they're facing the Cyclops and they're trying to trick him, or like the 101 Arabian Nights where you're trying to trick them so you don't go, like, you're going back to the classics of classics with that. That's the idea,
right? I mean, do the same thing, only different, right? Give people exactly what they love, but make it fresh. That's what we're trying to do with Kaivan the Unkillable. Right,
but what I mean is, when people talk of the classics, most people don't go past Lord of the Rings. You went way back into antiquity with that one, and I like it. Well, but you go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So you've told us a lot about the world already. Is there anything major about the world that this story is happening in that you feel like the reader needs to know?
Yes. Oh gosh, I'm glad you asked that question. So on the cover, you can see that it's framed, right? That frame is called a thuros. Okay. A thuros is a teleportation doorway, okay? And there are a limited number of these throughout the continent. Each of these can connect with any other thuros anywhere else, whether it's on this continent or another continent, but they have been defunct for 1,700 years. So, remember I told you that in book 4, things are going to start to come together? Well, in book 4, these thuroi, that's the plural for thuros, these thuroi are going to open up and the continents are going to start interacting with one another. So that is a huge portion of the world building, and obviously what a big piece of the plot hinges on, so much so that we are incorporating it in every single cover. Like, the things that stay the same on every single cover is the Thuros archway, the Eldros legacy, and then the individual symbols that represent each of the different continents.
Neat. So basically Stargate in the fantasy world. I like it.
Yes, exactly.
So Legacy of Shadows, Kaivan the Unkillable, is clearly part of a series. We've sort of talked about that. There are currently 4 books out, but where do you see the story going overall?
Well, so we're building the party at this point, and the way I'm writing these is each book, you could take each one of these books up to book 4, or I should say up to book 5, and you could read it, and you wouldn't need to read the previous one. It's a full, complete story in and of itself. Each of these. Kaivan the Unkillable is, Laurel of the Dark is, the 3rd one, Ren the Traveler is, and the 4th one, tentatively named Slater and the Dragon's Lair. And yes, that's supposed to be a little bit funny, because Slater himself, the character, the mage character, is a little bit funny. They're all going to be like kind of showing these individual members of the party and their character arc. And then they're going to get together, kind of like I said in the Avengers, and boom, they're going to wreak havoc. They're going to be those characters that you love, and they're going to go and do all the things. So, yeah, that's the way I'm writing them. So the meta plot, like the first 4 books are going to be this meta plot about the giants returning is going to keep ramping up and ramping up and ramping up. And we're going to see these characters come into their own and form this powerful Dungeons and Dragons party. I would say they all start at about level 7, and probably by the time they get to the 4th book, they're going to be, level 15 probably. And by the end of the series, level 20, right? And they're going to be super badass.
Okay. So we know that oh, Doc, you good?
Yeah, no, my internet's being weird, so I was conserving bandwidth for a bit.
Understood. So if she bounces, tech is a thing, and it's the stormy season.
They're trying to upgrade the internet in my neighborhood, but it seems to be downgrading it for a while. Yeah, you see how happy I am about it.
We can see it.
Jared, ask your question.
Okay, so we all know that every literary universe has their own internally consistent rules of science and technology and magic. So what can we expect from these books?
Yeah, actually, it's fairly detailed. I give a hat tip to Rob Howell for that. He created an entire magic system for Eldros before we even really kind of started forming the founding.
I think he does those for fun.
Oh, he totally does those for fun. So we've got 5 different streams of magic in this world. And humans, like a human could only master 1 stream of magic. Giants can master all 5, which is what makes them so powerful. So we have love magic, land magic, lore magic. Oh gosh, I'm going to forget 2 of them. No, I'm not. Line magic, and there's a 4th one. It's going to come to me in a second. Anyways, so, lore magic is kind of what Gandalf does. Like, he kind of reads a little bit of the future, and he's always in the right place at the right time, right? That's what lore magic is. Land magic is your classic, element bending, right? Like kind of like from Avatar. You got rock, you got flame, you got water. It's the physics kind of magic, right? And love magic is manipulating people's emotions, right? I mean, it's either making them happy, making them sad, making them fall in love, all that stuff. It's very keyed into manipulating people. And then, gosh, why can I not think of the other one? Oh, life magic. Duh. Okay, so life magic is like what druids do, right? They tap into this sort of anima of the things that living creatures have, right? And then line magic can do anything. You like write a symbol and it can do, either land magic or lore magic or whatever, but it can only do it like 30% as powerful as any of the others. So it's like a jack of all trades and master of none. Like you could never have a very powerful land magic spell from a line magic spell. So those are the 5, and those are the laws of magic that we stick to within this world. There's also
very detailed.
Yeah, it is. And it goes on and on. Like I barely scratched the surface there. There are pages literally written about each of these different ones. There's a Bible. We call it the Shaduran, or excuse me, the Eldros Bible, where it keeps all this information together.
If Rob Howell is true to form, the Bible itself is Brandon Sanderson-esque in quality of length.
Yes, for sure.
So
I wonder if he knows he's become a meme about long books.
Sanderson?
Yeah.
I don't think he cares.
I wouldn't care if I was him. Didn't he just make?
No, I'd wipe my tears with the dollar bills.
Yeah.
All right, Doc. Your favoriteest question, the ones you added to the document.
All the magic in this universe, which is the one that you would want?
Of all the what's in the universe?
All the magic in this universe, which one's the one you want?
Oh, in this Eldros universe. Oh gosh. I'd love to say line magic because then you could do anything, but I don't think I'm meticulous enough to really maximize the line magic. I'm gonna go with land magic. It'd be cool to be able to pick up rocks and spurt flame from my hands and so I'd go with land magic. I think that'd be the best for my personality. Lore magic would take just so much study and foresight, and I don't think I've got it in me.
Well, that makes sense. So how would you have used that magic?
how would I have used that magic?
No, how would you abuse it?
Oh, how would I abuse the magic? Oh, well, I mean, like, if you can, move mountains, then, I'd probably build myself a castle. And, if somebody was trying to hurt me, you just, blast them back with a puff of wind, or I don't know. I'm trying to think of how would I abuse it. I would like to think I wouldn't abuse it, I guess. Probably make things for myself that I wanted, I suppose, would be the
my coffee would never get cold.
Your coffee would never get cold. Would that really be abusing it, though? I think that would just be, good sense.
Indulging in it, I guess.
Yes, so. Indulging in it.
So you have fantastical creatures, and they're all basically from the same planet, right?
Yes.
Okay. So how did you go about designing any of the magical creatures you designed? Was it purpose-built? Was it biology? What?
Yeah, I was actually just talking to somebody about this today. I mean, they just jump into my head. I'm like, what do I need here? Oh, I'm going to have, something that's part lion and part owl with like bone wings that have shadow, skin on them. Like that. It's just like this kind of conglomeration. Then I come up with a nonsense word like Naguil to, create this character. And then I start coming over the history for the character. It's just sort of off the cuff. It really is. I mean, obviously, some of them were crafted specifically because the giants made them to do specific things. So like the Shadowvar, they've got this like midnight black skin that if they're in shadow, they vanish. Essentially, you can't see them, except for the white horns that they have that come up from their head. So they have to like cover their horns if they're going to be stealth. So just, the different kinds of things that pop into my head. It's like something random happens, like the freaking Big Bird,
Mm-hmm.
like it pops into my head, and then I'm like, okay, that's ridiculous. Let's see how I can make it work. Because something that I've learned as an author is if you take something ridiculous and you convince people through its backstory or how it fits into the world that it's actually essential, that's the best kind of fantasy of all, right? I mean, that's the best. It's like you suspend their disbelief on something ridiculous. Readers love that. Because they want to believe. That's why you read fantasy, isn't it? Because you want to believe. So if I can make it so they can actually suspend their disbelief, then I've done my job. And the more ridiculous something is, and that I'm successful in suspending disbelief, the better.
That's a good answer.
So now JR gets to figure out how to ask his question.
No, I was going to let you, in case you lost internet, I was going to let you bring up the dragon nomination stuff, because I know that's your
well, I mean, okay, but the interview's winding down. Yes, we can nominate, and we'll put the link in the comment section for nominating this for the wonderful Dragon Awards.
Yes.
And of course, the what on earth is you have this bullet point, including paranormal? What, JR?
That's how they said it was best fantasy novel, including paranormal, as the category.
Right. Yes. Ideally, they would love to be nominated in the best fantasy novel category for the Dragon Awards, which is, of course, a pure fandom award. Anybody in fandom can vote and nominate for it. And nominations close July 19th. So do it while you remember it, and do it soon.
All right. So
I'm subtle.
I thought you might want to have a discussion, but it's also late at night. I know. So before we
I have a discussion. It's called Talking with You.
So before we wrap this up, we like to ask this. It's one of the new things we're trying to fit in is what age range would you say this story is appropriate for? We've got a lot of families that listen to the show together, and we get that question a lot. Like, could my kids read this story? So
all of the Eldros books were designed to be PG-13. So
okay.
And I think depending on the parent, you could even go younger than that. You've got precocious readers that might enjoy this, but the relationship content level is really low. Like we're talking, oh, she looks so beautiful, and you might even get a kiss somewhere in the story, but that's it. That's about it.
just enough for them to go, "Hey, cuties." Okay, all right.
Right. Exactly.
So
exactly.
clearly, this is wrapping up. We've been at it for a little bit, having a blast doing it. We'll have to have you back for sure. But before we wrap this up, was there anything about the Kaiven the Unkillable that we didn't ask that you want to tell us?
No, this was comprehensive. This like covered it all. Yeah, I can't think of anything else that I would that about.
Is this available in audiobook for those that prefer to have their stories read to them?
Not yet, but I'm working on the audiobook. Like I am the bottleneck for that right now. I'm like, I've got to edit. I'm actually the voice talent for it, and
okay.
I have to edit it. So it's coming. It's coming. Bear with me.
Outstanding. All right. So this is the part of the interview, because we're way past the introduction. The coffee's wearing off, people. This is the part of the interview where we remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book. So do your part, people. It helps lubricate the wheels of literary success. Doc is mocking me, but the reviews matter. And I hear if you get like your 100,000th review, like they build you a castle and you get unicorns or something. I don't know.
They deliver it via the ports though, so you'll never get it in time.
Oh, this is true. And probably not with the way the Suez Canal's been working lately. It might never reach us. I wonder if that boat's still stuck there. But anyway, I digress. All right, Todd, can you tell listeners how they can find you on the wild interwebs?
Yeah, you can go to my website, toddfahnestock.com. You can also find me on my author page on Amazon. You can find me on Facebook. I have a group, like a fan group. I've also got an author page, which is Todd Fahnestock Fantasy Author. My group currently is called Quad Fahnestock, which is based on something that happens in Tower of the Four series. So that may be changing soon, though. I may be changing the name of that. So those are the places that you can find me.
All right, and we did link to his newsletter. So if you want to find out more or stalk him, as you do, we'll link to all of that. You can find us, Doc, don't give me that look. I can see it. You can find us on Twitter at twitter.com/SF_fantasy_show. Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. You can email the show at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook, where all the shenanigans happen, over at facebook.com/groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, /groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. You can find our website over on anchor.fm/Blasters and Blades. Again, anchor.fm/Blasters and Blades, where for as little as 99 cents a month, you could support the show and help keep the lights on. And that is truly appreciated. Or you could just, follow us and stalk us and do the things there too. But if you want to support the show, you could also do it, last but not least, at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that is for the podcast, and I promise that I will keep Doc Cisca and Nick Garber duly caffeinated. They will drink until they can hear color and see sound.
I'm very tone deaf, so it's going to take a lot of caffeine.
All right, so you've got your marching orders, people. You know what to do. Oh, and because this is the Blasters and Blades, last but not least, pineapple on pizza, yay or nay?
Oh, yeah, I like pineapple on pizza.
Yes!
Dang it, Doc got to you first, didn't she? Dang it.
Do the thing. So,
all right, Doc,
thank you for
spending
some of your precious time with us. For Nick
Absolutely.
Garber, the absentee, and the Addlebrain J.R. Handley, I'm Cisca. This was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week, indulging our love of cheese, pineapple on pizza, cheesy jokes, nerd culture, of course, all things that go bloom or stabby.